Jungkook holds Jimin's hand in the crowd of fans, palms revolving. An unforgettable moment of love. The scream that split the air wasn't from the crowd. It tore out of Jungkook's chest when the barrier lurched and Jimin disappeared from his sight. Lights pulsed like a heartbeat gone wild, white then red, sirens of camera shutters cracking in relentless rhythm. The smell of rain-soaked asphalt and hot metal drifted in from the open plaza as bodies surged, voices chanting their names in 1,000 overlapping waves. Jungkook shoved forward, breath sharp, fingers numb, scanning the chaos until there. Jimin's hair flashed silver under the lights, his smile gone, his eyes wide with a fear he tried to hide by habit. "Don't move," Jungkook said, though he wasn't sure if Jimin heard him over the roar. Security shouted orders that dissolved instantly. A fan stumbled, another cried out, the barricade bowed again. Jungkook didn't think. He lunged, his shoulder clipping a camera, his palm finding Jimin's wrist, warm, real, trembling, and he closed his hand around it like a vow. The moment snapped into focus as if the world had been pulled into a narrow frame. Jungkook felt the pulse under Jimin's skin, fast and stubborn. Jimin looked down at their hands, then up at Jungkook, a question and an answer crossing his face at once. For a heartbeat, there was only that contact, the crowd blurring into color and sound. Jimin squeezed back. They moved together then, not running, not stopping, just weaving, Jungkook leading with instinct, Jimin trusting him with a faith that felt heavier than any promise. Fans shouted, some in delight, some in shock, and phones rose like constellations. Jungkook's mind flashed with rules, contracts, headlines, the quiet warnings that had lived in him for years. He felt fear, yes, a cold edge at his ribs. He also felt something steadier underneath it, a calm born of choosing. They reached the black mouth of the tunnel behind the stage. The noise fell away in chunks, replaced by the echo of their steps and the hum of generators. Jungkook didn't let go until the door slammed shut and the lock slid home. Only then did he realize his hand was shaking. Jimin leaned back against the wall, breath uneven, laugh breaking through like a crack in glass. "You!" He stopped, eyes dropping again to their hands, still linked. His voice softened. "You didn't have to do that." Jungkook's thumb brushed Jimin's knuckle, a small, grounding habit he'd had since trainee days, a quiet code between them. "I did." Silence pooled, thick with what they weren't saying. The corridor smelled faintly of dust and citrus cleaner. Somewhere a monitor beeped. Jungkook's heart slowed enough for memory to creep in, years of rehearsed distance, the careful choreography of smiles that never lingered too long, touches that meant everything only because they vanished so quickly. Jimin straightened, the performer returning in layers. "They saw," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "Everyone saw." "I know." Jimin studied him the way he did before a difficult note, weighing breath and risk. Jungkook saw the familiar shadows there, the fear of becoming a headline instead of a person, the old wound of being told to be smaller. He also saw the spark that never died, the stubborn warmth that pulled people close even when he tried to push them away. "Are you okay?" Jungkook asked. Jimin nodded. "I was scared for a second." He smiled, gentle and devastating. "Then I felt you." The words landed and stayed. Jungkook swallowed. He thought of the first time he'd noticed how Jimin's laughter made the room tilt, of the late nights when music felt like confession, of the habit Jimin had of humming when he was anxious, low and almost shy. He thought of the rules again, and then of the crowd's faces, not angry, not cruel, but stunned into a sudden quiet awe. A knock sounded. A manager's voice filtered through, careful. "You two ready?" Jimin exhaled. "Always." On stage, the lights returned with a softer glow. The crowd roared anew, but the pitch had changed, curiosity threading through the sound. Jungkook and Jimin stepped into it side by side. Jungkook felt the familiar weight of the mic in his hand, the stage's heat, the pull of eyes. He also felt Jimin's presence like a steady note he could tune himself to. They sang. The song was one they'd practiced 100 times, but tonight it carried a new grain. Jungkook's voice wove around Jimin's, rougher, truer. During the bridge, the choreography brought them close. A breath passed between them. Jungkook reached out again, slower this time, deliberate. He took Jimin's hand. The crowd gasped, then surged into cheers that rolled like thunder. Cameras flashed, freezing the image from 1,000 angles. Jungkook didn't look away. Jimin's fingers curled into his, firm, sure. The heat of that grip cut through the noise and the fear and the years of restraint. Jungkook felt something inside him unlock, not loudly, but completely. In that held moment, Jungkook knew his own motivations with startling clarity. He was tired of loving in halves, tired of apologizing to himself. He wasn't brave by nature, he was devoted. And devotion, he realized, could be a kind of courage. They finished the song hand in hand. When the last note faded, Jungkook heard his name and Jimin's braided together by the crowd, a chant that sounded less like demand and more like blessing. Jimin laughed, tears bright at the corners of his eyes, and leaned in until their shoulders touched. Backstage afterward, the air felt calmer, like the aftermath of a storm that leaves the world washed clean. Staff moved quietly, glances respectful. No one scolded them. No one rushed them apart. Jungkook noticed the way Jimin reached for water and forgot to let go until the bottle clinked against Jungkook's ring. They sat on a low case, knees brushing. Jimin traced a small circle on Jungkook's palm, grounding both of them. "I was afraid," Jimin said softly. "Not of them, of losing what we have." Jungkook met his gaze. "We didn't lose it." Jimin smiled, that private curve meant only for him. "We didn't." Later, when the night had cooled and the plaza emptied, Jungkook stood at the door with Jimin, listening to the distant echo of fans still lingering, hopeful and tender. He inhaled, the scent of rain and metal replaced now by something sweeter, something like relief. "What happens now?" Jimin asked. Jungkook thought of the handhold replayed endlessly on screens, of questions and conversations to come. He also thought of the weight lifting from his chest. He answered honestly. "We keep choosing each other." Jimin nodded, eyes shining. He reached out one more time, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, just for Jungkook. Their hands met easily, naturally, as if they'd always belonged that way. Outside, the night held its breath and then let it go. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence that followed was louder than the crowd had been. Jungkook stood with his back against the wall, chest still rising too fast, while Jimin paced the narrow room like a caged flame, running a hand through his hair again and again. The air smelled of sweat, rain, and adrenaline. Outside, distant chanting leaked through concrete like a reminder that the world hadn't stopped just because they had. "Do you realize what you did out there?" Jimin finally said, stopping so abruptly that Jungkook looked up at him. Jungkook met his eyes without flinching. "Yes." "That wasn't choreography. That wasn't an accident." Jimin's voice trembled, sharp with fear and something dangerously close to hope. "That was you choosing in front of everyone." "I know," Jungkook said again, quieter, firmer. Jimin laughed once, breathless and almost hysterical. "God, you're unbelievable." He stepped closer, too close, close enough that Jungkook could see the faint crease between Jimin's brows, the one that appeared only when he was overwhelmed. "I've spent years teaching myself how to survive being seen just enough, and you," his voice cracked, "you ripped the door wide open." Jungkook pushed off the wall. "I didn't do it to hurt you." "I know," Jimin swallowed hard. "That's the problem." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jungkook felt the weight of everything press down at once. The contracts, the expectations, the invisible leash he'd learned to live with. Beneath it all was a deeper fear, one he rarely admitted even to himself, that if he didn't act now, he'd spend the rest of his life regretting silence. "You were scared," Jungkook said softly. "I felt it." Jimin's eyes flickered. "I've been scared for a long time." He let out a shaky breath. "Not of loving you, of what loving you costs." The door opened without warning. A manager stood there, face pale, tablet clutched like a shield. "Phones are exploding," he said bluntly. "The footage is everywhere. Half the reactions are euphoric. The other half," he hesitated, "they're not." Jungkook stepped forward instinctively, placing himself half a step in front of Jimin. "Then talk to me." The manager's eyes lingered on their proximity, on the way Jimin didn't move away. "This isn't just a moment anymore," he warned. "It's a statement." "Then let it be one." Jungkook replied. The manager studied him, searching for doubt for panic. He found neither. After a long pause, he sighed. We'll manage the fire, but understand this, there will be pressure. Interviews, silence requests, people telling you to undo what can't be unseen. When the door closed again, the room felt smaller. Jimin turned to Jungkook slowly. You heard him. I did. And you're still standing there, like you don't regret a second. Jungkook smiled faintly, sadness and certainty tangled together. I regret every time I didn't reach for you. Jimin stared at him, eyes shining. You're cruel, he whispered, saying things like that when I'm barely holding myself together. Jungkook reached out, hesitated for the briefest moment, then brushed his thumb against Jimin's wrist. The contact was light, intimate, loaded. Then let me help you hold. Jimin closed his eyes. When he opened them, tears slipped free, silent and unstoppable. Do you know how long I've waited to hear that? Jungkook's throat tightened. He pulled Jimin into his arms, slow, giving him every chance to pull away. Jimin didn't. He pressed his forehead into Jungkook's shoulder, fingers curling into the back of his jacket like an anchor. They stayed like that, breathing each other in, while the world outside argued and speculated and tried to name what they were. Later, when the night grew quiet and the storm of voices softened into distant noise, they sat side by side on the floor, backs against the wall. Jimin traced invisible shapes on the concrete with his finger. Tomorrow, Jimin said, voice barely above a whisper, they'll ask us to deny it, to say it was fan service, an impulse. Jungkook looked at him. And what do you want to say? Jimin turned, eyes steady now despite the exhaustion. I want to say it was love, unplanned, terrifying, real. Jungkook's heart slammed against his ribs. Then we say that. Jimin smiled through tears, a smile that carried years of longing and a fragile, burning hope. He reached for Jungkook's hand again, not shaking this time. Outside, the night didn't answer back, but it listened. Morning arrived without mercy. Jungkook woke to the vibration of his phone rattling against the bedside table like an alarm he couldn't silence. Messages stacked faster than he could read them, names flashing, numbers he didn't recognize, headlines bleeding through notifications. He didn't open any of them. He turned his head instead and found Jimin sitting on the edge of the bed, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the window as if the city beyond it might accuse him. They're calling it reckless, Jimin said without turning around. Romantic, dangerous, a betrayal, a miracle. He let out a hollow laugh. Apparently we're everything except human. Jungkook sat up, the sheets cold against his skin. Come back here. Jimin hesitated, then moved, curling into Jungkook's side. His body was warm, tense, alive. Jungkook wrapped an arm around him, feeling the familiar fit that always felt like coming home and leaving at the same time. I didn't sleep, Jimin admitted. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment on stage, your hand, the crowd. I kept wondering if I dreamed it. Jungkook pressed his lips to Jimin's temple. You didn't. Jimin turned then, eyes sharp. Say it again. I held your hand, Jungkook said, meeting his gaze. Because I wanted to, because I love you. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Jimin inhaled sharply, as if struck. You don't get to say that so easily. Jungkook frowned. Why not? Because if you say it like that, Jimin said, voice trembling, I'll believe it with my whole life. Jungkook cupped Jimin's face, thumbs brushing away the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. I want you to. The knock at the door shattered the moment. When they entered the conference room, the air felt hostile, thick with unspoken ultimatums. Executives lined the table, faces carefully neutral, screens behind them frozen on a paused video. Jungkook and Jimin, hands intertwined, caught in high definition. This situation, one of them began, requires immediate damage control. Jimin's jaw tightened. Jungkook felt it even before he spoke. You mean erasure, Jimin said calmly. A murmur rippled through the room. We're suggesting clarification, another executive countered. Ambiguity, a statement emphasizing friendship, gratitude to fans. No, Jungkook said. surprising even himself with the steadiness of his voice. All eyes snapped to him. "No," someone echoed. Jungkook leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "We're not lying." A long silence followed, broken only by the hum of the projector. Jimin glanced at him, something fierce and fragile colliding in his expression. "If you ask us to deny it," he added, "you're asking us to fracture ourselves, and you won't get the same artists back." One executive scoffed. "You think this is about your feelings?" Jungkook's voice dropped. "I think it's about our humanity." The tension cracked like ice underfoot. Arguments flared, voices rising, words like brand, market, backlash flying through the room. Jungkook felt the pressure mount, the old fear clawing back, but Jimin's knee brushed his under the table, grounding him. Finally, the room fell quiet. "There will be consequences," the first executive said coldly. "Lost endorsements, canceled appearances, you may not be forgiven." Jimin stood, "Then let them see us anyway." Jungkook stood with him. They left the room together, hands brushing, not hiding. Outside, the building was surrounded. Fans, reporters, signs raised high, some reading "Love wins," others demanding explanations. The noise surged as soon as they appeared. Jungkook felt Jimin's fingers find his again, deliberate this time. "Are you ready?" Jimin asked softly. Jungkook squeezed back. "With you." They stepped forward. Cameras exploded into light. Questions flew like weapons. Jungkook ignored them all, focusing on the steady rhythm of Jimin's breathing beside him. Jimin stopped at the edge of the crowd. He turned, voice clear despite the chaos. "We won't apologize for caring about each other," he said. "If that disappoints you, I'm sorry, but this is our truth." A gasp rippled outward, followed by something unexpected applause. Not everyone, not even most, but enough to matter. Jungkook felt tears burn behind his eyes. He leaned toward Jimin, murmuring, "Thank you." Jimin smiled, soft and unbreakable. "For what?" "For not letting go." Jimin laced their fingers tighter. "I never planned to." That night, away from the noise, they sat together in quiet, the city lights stretching endlessly before them. The future was uncertain, sharp-edged, real. But for the first time, it wasn't lonely. Jungkook rested his head against Jimin's shoulder, heart full and aching and brave. Whatever came next, they would face it hand in hand. The interview room was too bright, the lights humming like they were alive, watching. Jungkook felt it before anyone spoke, the pressure, the expectation that they would bend. Jimin sat beside him, legs crossed, posture elegant but rigid, his fingers tapping once against his knee, a habit that always surfaced when he was holding back a storm. The host smiled, polished and sharp. "Last night was historic," she said. "Millions watched that moment, Jungkook holding Jimin's hand. People are calling it a declaration." Jimin tilted his head. "People call many things declarations." The host's smile tightened. "So you're saying it was?" Jungkook leaned forward before Jimin could answer. "I'm saying it was exactly what it looked like." A murmur rippled through the staff behind the cameras. The host raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Jungkook didn't look away. "Care, protection, love." The word landed like a match to gasoline. Jimin turned to him sharply. "Jungkook." "No," Jungkook said softly, still facing forward. "Let me." The host's voice sharpened. "You understand the implications of saying that on live broadcast?" Jungkook finally glanced at Jimin. Jimin's eyes were wide, shining, not with fear now, but with something raw, almost painful. Hope. "I understand," Jungkook said. "I've understood for years." Jimin exhaled slowly, then laughed under his breath, a sound edged with disbelief. "You really are choosing chaos." "I'm choosing you." Silence swallowed the room. The host recovered quickly. "Jimin, how do you respond to that?" Jimin stared at Jungkook for a long moment, searching his face like he might find hesitation hidden there. He didn't. Whatever resolve Jungkook had reached was complete, irreversible. Jimin turned back to the camera. "I respond by saying I'm tired of being brave alone." The broadcast ended minutes later in controlled confusion. Backstage, the walls seemed to close in. A manager grabbed Jungkook's arm. "What you just did, do you realize how many doors you closed?" Jungkook pulled free. "I opened one." Another voice snapped. "You're being selfish." Jimin stepped between them, eyes cold. "No, we were taught to disappear for too long. That's the real selfishness." They were ushered into a private room, the door slamming shut like punctuation. The noise outside faded, leaving only the sound of their breathing. Jimin turned on Jungkook, emotion finally breaking through his control. "You said it, on camera." His voice shook. "Do you know how terrifying that is?" Jungkook didn't retreat. "Yes." "Then why do I feel like I can finally breathe?" Jimin whispered. Jungkook reached for him, stopping inches away, giving him the choice. "Because you're not alone anymore." Jimin grabbed his shirt and pulled him close, forehead colliding with Jungkook's shoulder. "I hate you," he murmured, "for making me want this more." Jungkook's arms came around him instinctively. "You don't hate me." Jimin laughed weakly. "No, that's the problem." They stayed like that until the shaking stopped. Hours later, when night swallowed the city again, they slipped onto the rooftop, escaping handlers and noise. Wind tugged at their clothes, carrying distant sirens and fan chants below. Jimin leaned on the railing. "There will be consequences," he said. "They'll test us, try to separate us, maybe punish us." Jungkook stepped beside him. "Then we endure." Jimin looked at him sideways. "You talk like this is a battle." "It is," Jungkook replied, "but not against them." He touched Jimin's hand. "Against the part of ourselves that learned to hide." Jimin's fingers curled around his. "I spent years mastering control," he admitted, "and one night with you destroyed it." Jungkook smiled faintly. "You look better like this." Jimin shook his head, smiling through unshed tears. "You're impossible. And you're worth it." Below them, fans held candles, lights flickering like a constellation born on the ground. Some cried, some argued, some simply waited. Jimin watched them, then whispered, "Do you think love can survive being this visible?" Jungkook answered without hesitation, "Only if we let it." Jimin turned fully toward him then, eyes fierce, voice steady. "Then don't ever let go." Jungkook tightened his grip. "I won't." The night didn't soften. The world didn't suddenly become kind. But on that rooftop, with the wind bearing witness, they stood unhidden, bruised, defiant, and burning, ready to face whatever came next together. The silence before the storm was worse than the shouting. Jungkook felt it the moment his phone stopped buzzing. No notifications, no calls, just an eerie stillness, like the world was holding its breath before deciding whether to crush them or crown them. Jimin noticed it too. He was sitting on the couch, knees drawn up, staring at the dark screen of the television as if it might suddenly accuse him. "They've gone quiet," he said. "That's never good." Jungkook set his phone down slowly. "They're planning." Jimin laughed, sharp and bitter. "Of course they are." A knock echoed through the suite, heavy and deliberate. Not a polite tap, a demand. When the door opened, the CEO stood there, flanked by two senior executives. No smiles, no pretense. "We need to talk," the CEO said. Jimin stood first, "Then talk." The room filled with tension as they entered, the door closing behind them like a verdict. The CEO folded his hands. "What you're doing is destabilizing." Jungkook tilted his head. "We're standing still." "You're forcing the company into a corner," one executive snapped. "Sponsors are threatening to pull out. Investors are nervous. You've turned a private impulse into a public crisis." Jimin's eyes flashed. It wasn't an impulse. The CEO studied him. "Then what was it?" Jimin didn't look at Jungkook this time. He looked straight ahead. "It was honesty." A sharp inhale moved through the room. "You're idols," the CEO said coldly, "not symbols of rebellion." Jungkook stepped forward. "We're people first." The CEO's gaze hardened. "Then act like it. We're offering you a solution." Jimin stiffened. "I don't like how that sounds." "You will issue a statement." the CEO continued, clarifying that there is no romantic relationship, that the moment was misinterpreted. In return, we protect your careers. Jungkook felt something snap inside him, clean and final. And if we refuse? The room went very still. Then we step back, the CEO said. From you, from protection, from damage control. Jimin laughed softly, disbelief bleeding into anger. So that's it, lie or be abandoned. You'll survive, the executive said. Fans move on. Jimin turned sharply. No, you move on, we live with it. The CEO's eyes flicked between them. Think carefully. You're stronger apart than together in this situation. Jungkook reached for Jimin's hand openly, defiantly. You're wrong. Jimin squeezed back, grounding himself. We're only strong because of this. The CEO sighed, irritation creeping in. Love doesn't pay the price of fame. Jungkook answered quietly, dangerously calm. Then fame isn't worth its cost. For a moment, it looked like the CEO might explode. Instead, he straightened. You have 24 hours. When they were gone, the room collapsed into sound again. Jimin's unsteady breathing, Jungkook's heartbeat roaring in his ears. Jimin pulled his hand free and paced, running both hands through his hair. They're serious, he said. They'll let us burn. Jungkook watched him, fear twisting with admiration. I know. Jimin stopped suddenly. Say it. Jungkook frowned. Say what? Say you're scared, Jimin said, voice breaking. Because if you're not, then I'm the only one and I can't. His voice cracked. I can't be brave alone again. Jungkook crossed the room and cupped Jimin's face, forcing him to look up. His own eyes were glassy. I'm terrified. Jimin exhaled shakily. Good. Jungkook rested his forehead against Jimin's. I'm scared of losing everything. I'm scared of hurting you. I'm scared that tomorrow the world will decide we're a mistake. Jimin whispered, and yet, Jungkook said, voice trembling but sure, I would choose this fear over a lifetime of pretending. Jimin closed his eyes, tears finally falling. You're ruining me. I know, Jungkook murmured. Let me. They sank onto the couch together. Jimin curled into Jungkook's chest like he'd been holding himself apart for too long. Jungkook felt the weight of him, real and fragile and unreplaceable. What if we lose the stage? Jimin whispered. What if they take everything we built? Jungkook kissed his hair. Then we build something new. Jimin laughed weakly. You say that like it's easy. It's not, Jungkook admitted. But loving you has never been easy. It's just been worth it. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, distant but approaching. Jimin lifted his head, eyes fierce through tears. If we go down, he said, we go down telling the truth. Jungkook nodded. Together. Jimin took a shaky breath, then smiled, small, defiant. Beautiful. Then tomorrow, he said softly, we stop running. Jungkook held him tighter as the storm finally broke, rain lashing the windows like applause or warning. Either way, they were ready. The rain didn't stop by morning, as if the city itself was trying to wash the truth back into silence. Jungkook stood in front of the mirror, hands braced on the sink, staring at his own reflection like it might argue with him. His eyes were darker than usual, sleepless but resolved. Behind him, Jimin buttoned his shirt with trembling fingers, missing a buttonhole twice before Jungkook reached back and helped him. You don't have to do this, Jimin said quietly, though they both knew it was already done. Jungkook met his gaze in the mirror. Neither do you. Jimin's lips curved into a sad smile. I stopped believing that years ago. They arrived at the press hall under umbrellas and scrutiny. The crowd outside was louder than any concert, fans crying, shouting encouragement, others demanding answers, reporters barking questions like accusations. Flashbulbs burst relentlessly, white light cutting through the gray morning. Inside, the room buzzed with tension so thick it felt combustible. The company logo loomed behind the podium like a warning. Jungkook and Jimin walked in together, no space between them, no hands held, but everyone saw it anyway. A reporter didn't wait for permission. Are you here to deny the rumors? Jimin leaned toward the microphone, voice steady. "We're here to speak." Another voice cut in, sharper. "Is your relationship real, or was it a publicity stunt?" Jungkook inhaled, then answered before anyone else could. "It was real long before anyone noticed." The room erupted. "Are you confirming? What about the company? Do you regret?" Jimin raised his hand slightly. The room didn't quiet immediately, but slowly, reluctantly, it did. When he spoke again, his voice carried something raw and undeniable. "We're not asking for permission," Jimin said. "We're not here to negotiate our existence. We're here because lying would cost more than telling the truth." A reporter scoffed. "You're risking everything." Jungkook nodded. "We know." "And you're willing to destroy your careers for this," another demanded. Jungkook glanced sideways at Jimin. Jimin met his eyes, open and unguarded. "I'm willing to stop destroying myself," Jungkook replied. Silence fell like a held breath. From the back of the room, a younger reporter spoke, voice trembling. "When did you know?" Jimin's shoulders softened. When holding his hand felt safer than letting go. Jungkook reached out then, finally, openly, fingers threading with Jimin's in full view of the cameras. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by applause that started small and grew, uneven but real. Not everyone clapped. As they left the podium, phones buzzed again, statements released, sponsorships suspended, hashtags warring across screens. Jungkook felt the weight of it press down, the consequences unfolding in real time. Back in the car, Jimin stared out the window, silent. Jungkook watched him, worry tightening his chest. "Talk to me." Jimin swallowed. "I thought I'd feel lighter," he laughed softly. "I feel exposed." Jungkook took his hand, thumb brushing a familiar circle. "You're allowed to be scared." Jimin turned, eyes wet. "What if this breaks us?" Jungkook answered without hesitation. "Then it won't be the truth that did it." That night, they sat on the floor of the suite, surrounded by the quiet aftermath. The television played muted footage of their press conference, their words dissected, slowed down, argued over. Jimin leaned into Jungkook's shoulder. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "The noise," Jimin said. "It's not inside my head anymore." Jungkook kissed his temple. "We moved it outside." Jimin closed his eyes, exhausted. "Promise me something." "Anything." "If this becomes too much," Jimin whispered, "don't stay out of guilt." Jungkook tightened his arms around him. "I'm staying out of love." Jimin laughed softly, the sound breaking and healing something at once. "You're really serious." "I always have been," Jungkook said. "I was just afraid to be loud about it." Outside, the rain finally eased, leaving the city raw and shining. Inside, they stayed where they were, holding on, not because it was easy, but because for the first time it was honest. The night they finally slept, the city outside had gone quiet in a way Jungkook had never known before. Morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and cautious, as if unsure it was welcome. Jungkook woke first, aware of the weight against his chest, the steady warmth of Jimin breathing there. For a moment he didn't move. He let himself exist in that fragile, ordinary miracle. No cameras, no questions, no hands reaching to pull them apart. Jimin stirred, eyes blinking open, unfocused at first. Then he looked up, really looked, and something eased in his expression. "We're still here," Jimin murmured. Jungkook smiled faintly. "I told you." Jimin studied his face like he was memorizing it again, as if the world might try to rewrite this moment later. "Do you ever think about who we could have been if we were braver sooner?" Jungkook brushed a thumb along Jimin's cheek. "I think about who we are now because we finally are." Silence settled between them, not heavy this time, but full. The past days replayed in Jungkook's mind. The crowd, the handhold, the shock, the anger, the applause that sounded like rain. He realized something then that surprised him. He wasn't mourning what they'd lost. He was grieving the years they'd survived without this truth. Later, they stepped outside together for the first time without hiding. No disguises, no distance. Some people stared, some smiled, a few whispered. One fan bowed slightly, eyes shining, and said, "Thank you for being honest." Jimin stopped walking after that. He pressed his lips together, emotion breaking through in his eyes. Jungkook squeezed his hand, steady and present. At the river, they stood watching the water move forward without asking permission from anything it passed. Jimin leaned against the railing, shoulders finally relaxed. "I was taught love was something you paid for later," Jimin said quietly. "That joy always came with debt." Jungkook shook his head. "Love isn't a debt, it's a choice." Jimin smiled, slow and real. "Then I choose you." Jungkook didn't answer with words. He pulled Jimin close, forehead to forehead, and breathed him in like the truth he'd waited too long to say aloud. They didn't pretend everything was fixed. Some doors stayed closed. Some nights were still loud with doubt. But they learned how to live in that space together, how to protect each other without disappearing, how to be soft without being silent. And when people spoke of that moment, the crowd, the lights, the hands intertwined, they called it many things. A scandal. A revolution. A risk. But for Jungkook and Jimin, it was simpler than that. It was the moment love stopped hiding and finally stayed.